The crack of a rifle shot ricocheted through the dry air of Redemption Creek, silencing the saloon as every head turned toward the imposing figure of Killian Drake, standing over the body of a would-be thief, gun still smoking in his steady hand. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his chiseled face as he holstered his weapon and returned to his whiskey, the patrons of the Silver Dollar giving him a wide berth as whispers circulated. "That Drake fella, they say he's got ice in his veins." Redemption Creek, Colorado Territory, 1876, had seen its share of hard men since the Silver Strike 3 years prior, but none quite like Killian. A former cavalry officer turned bounty hunter, his reputation for cold efficiency had spread throughout the territory like wildfire. He never hesitated, never showed mercy, and most notably never seemed to feel anything at all. The early summer heat beat down mercilessly as Killian exited the saloon, adjusting his black Stetson to shield his piercing blue eyes from the glare. His tall frame cast a long shadow on the dusty Main Street as he made his way toward the sheriff's office to collect his bounty. Drake, Sheriff Wilson acknowledged without looking up from his desk, heard the commotion. "Jacobson dead, wounded, doctors with him now." Killian's voice was deep and even, betraying nothing of his thoughts. The sheriff sighed, reaching for a lockbox. "That's the third one this month. Starting to think you enjoy this work too much." "It's just work," Killian replied, counting the bills handed to him. His face remained impassive as he tucked the money into his vest pocket. "One day, Drake, someone's gonna find a way under that armor of yours," the sheriff mused. "Man can't live his whole life feeling nothing." Killian merely nodded, a gesture more of dismissal than agreement, and headed for the door. He had learned long ago that emotions were liabilities in a land where death waited around every corner. The war had taught him that. The years that followed had only reinforced the lesson. Outside, the town was coming to life despite the early hour. Merchants opened their stores, a stagecoach rumbled down the main street, and miners trudged toward the hills that had made Redemption Creek a boomtown. Killian headed toward the livery stable where his dun gelding waited. As he approached, the unmistakable sound of an argument reached his ears. A woman's voice, clear and defiant, cut through the morning air. "I assure you, Mr. Hargrove, I am perfectly capable of managing my father's affairs. The deed is legitimate, and I expect you to honor it." "Miss Porter, with all due respect, mining is no business for a lady. Your father's claim might be legitimate, but you'd be better off selling it to someone who knows what they're doing." Killian paused, his interest piqued despite himself. He rounded the corner to see a woman standing toe-to-toe with Burton Hargrove, the town's wealthiest mine owner. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore a traveling dress that, while dusty from the road, was clearly of fine quality. "My father spent his life searching for that silver vein, Mr. Hargrove. I did not come all the way from Boston to simply hand it over to the first man who makes an offer." Hargrove's face reddened with anger. "You've got spirit, Miss Porter, I'll give you that. But you'll find Redemption Creek isn't kind to stubborn women." "Is that a threat, sir?" The woman's posture stiffened. "It's a fact of life in the territories." Hargrove spat before turning on his heel. As Hargrove stormed away, he nearly collided with Killian. "Watch yourself with that one, Drake," he muttered. "Thinks she can run a mining operation because her daddy left her a hole in the ground." Killian watched him go before turning his attention back to the woman. She was gathering her belongings, a trunk and carpet bag, clearly flustered but determined not to show it. "You need assistance, madam?" The words left his mouth before he could consider why he was offering. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, bright with intelligence and currently narrowed in suspicion. "That depends. Are you another businessman eager to relieve me of my inheritance?" "No, madam, just offering to help with your bags." She studied him for a moment, taking in his worn duster, the pistol at his hip, and the hard set of his jaw. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Drake, Killian Drake." A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "The bounty hunter," he nodded once. I'm Lillian Porter." She extended her hand, which he took after a moment's hesitation. Her grip was firm, surprising him. "Well, Mr. Drake, if you're truly offering assistance and not plotting to acquire my silver claim, I could use help getting these to the Silverton Hotel." Killian lifted her trunk effortlessly. "You've come at a bad time, Miss Porter. The miners' strike has everyone on edge. I've come at exactly the right time, Mr. Drake. My father's letter reached me only after his death. I don't intend to waste any more time." They walked in silence for a moment before Lillian spoke again. "You don't approve of my being here." "It's not my place to approve or disapprove," he replied evenly. "Yet you have an opinion." Killian stopped walking. "Miss Porter, this town is dangerous for anyone, especially a woman alone. Hargrove wasn't exaggerating about that." "I'm aware of the dangers, Mr. Drake. I'm not some sheltered debutante who's never faced hardship." Her chin lifted slightly. "My father was Jefferson Porter. Perhaps you've heard of him." Killian had indeed heard of Jefferson Porter, a respected prospector who had discovered one of the richest silver veins in the territory shortly before dying in a suspicious mine collapse. "Your father was a good man." "Yes, he was," she said softly, her defiance momentarily giving way to grief. "And someone deliberately caused that cave-in. I intend to find out who." Killian felt a tug of something unfamiliar concern, perhaps, but quickly suppressed it. "That's a dangerous accusation, Miss Porter." "It's not an accusation yet, Mr. Drake, merely a suspicion I intend to confirm." They had reached the hotel and she turned to face him fully. "Thank you for your assistance. I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of each other." "Madam," he nodded, setting down her trunk. As she disappeared into the hotel, Killian found himself strangely unsettled. There was something about Lillian Porter that had pierced through his practiced detachment, if only for a moment. The next morning found Killian at his usual table in the corner of the Silver Dollar, nursing a cup of coffee as he observed the room. The saloon served as Redemption Creek's informal gathering place, where information flowed as freely as the whiskey. "Mind if I join you?" The voice startled him, though he didn't show it. Lillian Porter stood beside his table dressed in a practical riding skirt and jacket, her hair braided down her back. Without waiting for his response, she pulled out a chair and sat. "I've been making inquiries about you, Mr. Drake." "Have you now?" He kept his voice neutral. "They say you're the best tracker in the territory, that you never fail to find your target." She leaned forward. "They also say you have ice in your veins, that nothing touches you. People talk too much, perhaps, but I need someone like you." She placed a folded piece of paper on the table. "I want to hire you." Killian didn't reach for the paper. "I'm a bounty hunter, Miss Porter, not a bodyguard. I'm not looking for protection, I'm looking for justice." Her green eyes held his steadily. "My father's mine was sabotaged, Mr. Drake. I need someone who can find proof of who did it." "The law, Sheriff Wilson, has already dismissed my concerns. Says mining accidents happen all the time." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "But my father was experienced. He wouldn't have made a novice mistake." Killian finally picked up the paper, unfolding it to reveal a substantial sum written in neat handwriting. "This is generous. It's fair for what I'm asking. Will you help me?" He studied her for a long moment. Getting involved with Lillian Porter's vendetta was risky, especially if her suspicions about Hargrove were correct. The mine owner had influence throughout the territory, but something in her determined gaze made refusal difficult. "I'll look into it. No promises beyond that." Relief softened her features. "Thank you, Mr. Drake. When can we start?" "We?" "Yes, we. It's my father's mine, my investigation." Killian shook his head. "That wasn't part of the arrangement. It is now." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "I'll meet you at the livery at dawn tomorrow." "We're something suitable for exploring a mine shaft." Before he could protest further, she was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of lavender and a strange warmth in his chest that Killian quickly attributed to irritation. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountains surrounding Redemption Creek. Killian arrived at the livery to find Lillian already there, dressed in men's trousers and a jacket that had clearly belonged to her father. judging by how it engulfed her slender frame. Her hair was tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "You're punctual," she noted approvingly. "I've arranged for horses. Miss Porter, Lillian, please. If we're to work together, formality seems unnecessary." "Lillian," he tried again, the name feeling strangely intimate on his tongue. "This is dangerous work. The mine could be unstable." "I'm aware of the risks, Mr. Drake." "Killian," he found himself saying. A smile touched her lips. "Killian, then, shall we?" The ride to the Porter claim took nearly 2 hours, winding through rugged terrain that grew increasingly remote. Lillian rode with surprising skill, keeping pace with Killian without complaint. They spoke little, but the silence was oddly comfortable. The mine entrance was nestled against a granite outcropping, partially concealed by pine trees. A weathered sign reading Porter Silver hung crookedly over the entrance, which was partially blocked by debris. "This is it," Lillian said softly, dismounting. "Home of the infamous Porter lode." Killian tied their horses to a nearby tree before joining her at the entrance. "The cave-in happened 3 months ago," she nodded, her expression solemn. "April 18th. They found his body 2 days later." Killian examined the timbers supporting the mine entrance. His experienced eye noted inconsistencies immediately. "These support beams, they're newer than they should be." "What do you mean?" "Someone's been here since the accident, replaced some of the damaged supports." He crouched, running his fingers along a cut in the wood. "These were cut with a saw, not broken in a collapse." Lillian's eyes widened. "So someone has been in the mine since my father died." "Appears that way." Killian removed his duster and drew his pistol. "Stay behind me." Equipped with lanterns, they ventured carefully into the mine shaft. The air grew cool and damp as they descended, the light from their lanterns casting eerie shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Killian moved with practiced caution, testing each step before proceeding. "My father wrote that the silver vein was about 300 yards in, at a junction where the shaft splits," Lillian whispered, her voice echoing slightly. After what seemed like an eternity of careful progress, they reached a widening in the tunnel. Fresh timber supports had been installed, and a set of tracks for ore carts led deeper into the mountain. "This wasn't in my father's letters," Lillian said. "These improvements are new." Killian raised his lantern higher. "Someone's been mining here. Recently?" A noise from deeper in the shaft caused them both to freeze. Killian immediately extinguished his lantern and pulled Lillian into a side alcove, his body shielding hers as voices approached. "Hargrove wants another shipment by week's end," a gruff voice said. "Says the Eastern investors are getting impatient." "Ain't my fault this vein's proving trickier than expected," another voice replied. Porter knew what he was doing, hiding this discovery. Lillian stiffened against Killian, and he instinctively tightened his arm around her. They remained perfectly still as 2 miners passed their hiding place, too engaged in conversation to notice the interlopers. When the voices faded, Killian released Lillian, immediately missing her warmth against him. "That confirms your suspicions." "Hargrove," she whispered, anger and vindication battling in her voice. "He's stealing my father's silver. We need to leave. Now." Killian reignited their lantern at the lowest setting. "We have enough to take to the federal marshal in Denver." They retraced their steps carefully, tension mounting with each passing moment. As they neared the entrance, a shower of loose rock from above warned them seconds before part of the ceiling collapsed, blocking their path. "Run!" Killian grabbed Lillian's hand, pulling her forward as more debris rained down. They barely made it through the narrowing passage before the entire section behind them gave way with a deafening roar. They emerged into daylight, coughing and covered in dust. Killian didn't release Lillian's hand until they reached the horses, which were nervously stamping and pulling at their tethers. "That was no accident," Lillian gasped, still catching her breath. "Someone knew we were in there." Killian scanned the tree line, pistol drawn. "We're being watched." "Mount up quickly." They rode hard, taking a different route back than the one they'd used earlier. Killian led them through a series of ravines and dense forest, ensuring they weren't followed. When they finally stopped to rest the horses by a small stream, Lillian slid from her saddle with shaking legs. "They tried to kill us." "They tried to kill you," Killian corrected grimly. "You're the legal owner of that mine. With you gone, Hargrove could probably manipulate the claim records." Lillian sank down on a boulder, the reality of their situation washing over her. "What do we do now?" "We get back to town and telegraph the federal marshal." Killian filled their canteens from the stream. "Then we keep you safe until he arrives." "Where?" Lillian looked up at him, vulnerability showing through her brave facade for the first time. "Hargrove has men everywhere in Redemption Creek." Killian hesitated, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "I have a cabin about 10 miles north of town. No one knows about it except me." The trust in her eyes as she nodded her agreement stirred something long dormant in his chest. Night had fallen by the time they reached Killian's cabin, a sturdy structure tucked into a stand of pines with a clear view of the valley below. He helped Lillian from her horse, noting her exhaustion. "It's not much," he said as he unlocked the door, "but it's secure." The interior was spare but clean: a table and chairs, a stone fireplace, a bed in the corner, and shelves stocked with provisions. Killian quickly lit a fire and several lamps, warming the space. "It's perfect," Lillian said, removing her hat and running fingers through her tangled hair. "I didn't know bounty hunters had permanent homes. Most don't." He busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork. "I built this place after the war, needed somewhere quiet." "The war." She settled into a chair by the fire. "You fought Union cavalry 5 years." He didn't elaborate, and Lillian didn't press. They ate in companionable silence, the events of the day weighing heavily on both of them. When they finished, Killian cleared the plates and said, "You should take the bed, I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," she argued gently. "I'm fine." "No, you're not. No one is fine after almost being buried alive." Her perceptiveness unsettled him. "We can take shifts if you're concerned." Killian wanted to maintain his distance, his professional detachment, but found himself nodding in agreement instead. "I'll wake you in 4 hours," he said, settling into the chair by the window, rifle across his lap. Lillian hesitated, then crossed to where he sat. Before he could react, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Killian, not just for today, but for believing me when no one else would." The simple touch sent an unexpected jolt through him. He looked up to find her face close to his, her eyes reflecting the firelight. For a breathless moment, something electric passed between them, something Killian hadn't felt in years, if ever. "Get some rest," he said gruffly, breaking the spell. She nodded and retreated to the bed, removing only her boots before lying down. Soon, her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Killian watched the night through the window, but found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Lillian's sleeping form. She had shown remarkable courage today, facing danger without flinching. Her determination to honor her father's memory spoke of a character rarely encountered in his line of work. He realized, with a jolt of clarity, that he admired her. More than that, he was beginning to care what happened to her beyond the parameters of their arrangement. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. When the time came to wake her, he found himself reluctant to disturb her peace. He gently touched her shoulder, and she came awake instantly, her hand automatically reaching for the small derringer she kept in her pocket. "It's just me," he said softly. "Your watch." She nodded, fully alert despite her brief rest. As she took his place by the window, Killian stretched out on the bed, still warm from her body. Sleep came more easily than it had in years. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the pine branches outside. Killian woke to find Lillian at the stove, preparing coffee. She had found his stores and managed to make flapjacks as well. "You didn't wake me," he observed, rising. "You needed the rest more than I needed mine." She handed him a cup of coffee. Besides, nothing happened. Over breakfast, they formulated a plan. Killian would go into town alone to send the telegram to the federal marshal. Lillian would remain at the cabin until it was safe to return. "I don't like staying behind while you take all the risk," she protested. Hargrove doesn't know I'm involved yet. I can move through town without raising suspicion. He checked his pistol and rifle methodically. I'll be back by nightfall. And if you're not, his eyes met hers. Then ride east to Denver. Don't stop for anyone. The concern in her eyes caused that strange warmth to spread through his chest again. Be careful, Killian, he nodded, suddenly unable to form words around the tightness in his throat. The ride into Redemption Creek was uneventful, but Killian remained vigilant. He left his horse at a livery on the outskirts of town and proceeded on foot, keeping to side streets and alleyways. The telegraph office was mercifully empty when he arrived. He penned a brief but detailed message to Marshal James Harrington in Denver, describing the illegal mining operation and the attempt on their lives. The operator promised to send it immediately. Killian's next stop was the general store, where he purchased additional supplies. As he was paying, the door opened and Burton Hargrove entered with two of his men. Drake, Hargrove acknowledged, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. Haven't seen you around lately. Been tracking a bounty up north, Killian lied smoothly. Any luck? Some still working on it. He gathered his purchases, every sense alert. Heard the Porter woman's gone missing, Hargrove commented casually. Checked out of her hotel yesterday and never returned, sheriff's concerned. Is that right? Killian kept his expression impassive. Dangerous territory for a woman alone. Indeed it is. Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. If you happen to run across her in your travels, you might let her know she's been missed. The threat was thinly veiled. Killian nodded and moved toward the door, careful not to turn his back fully on Hargrove's men. I'll do that. Once outside, Killian took a circuitous route back to the livery, checking repeatedly to ensure he wasn't followed. He had nearly reached his destination when a shot rang out, the bullet splintering the wood of a water trough inches from his position. Killian drew his pistol and dove for cover behind a stack of lumber as two more shots followed in quick succession. Peering around the edge, he spotted one of Hargrove's men on a nearby rooftop. He fired twice, forcing the shooter to retreat, then sprinted toward the livery. More gunfire erupted behind him, but he reached his horse and swung into the saddle in one fluid motion. He charged out of town at a gallop, bullets kicking up dust at his heels. Once clear of the immediate danger, Killian cut away from the main trail, taking a winding path through dense forest to throw off any pursuit. It added hours to his journey, and dusk was falling by the time he approached his cabin. He dismounted some distance away and approached on foot, wary of an ambush. His caution proved warranted when he spotted unfamiliar horses tied behind the cabin. Drawing his pistol, Killian crept closer. Through the window, he could see Lillian seated at the table, her posture rigid with fear. Across from her sat Hargrove, while two armed men stood guard. Killian circled to the back of the cabin, where a small window provided access to the root cellar. He silently removed the wooden shutters and slipped inside, navigating the narrow space by memory until he reached the trapdoor leading to the main floor. He listened carefully, catching fragments of conversation above. Simply sign over the claim, Miss Porter, and this unpleasantness can end, Hargrove was saying. You killed my father. Lillian's voice was steady despite her situation. I'll die before I let you profit from his murder. That can be arranged, my dear. Though I'd prefer a more civilized resolution. Killian eased the trapdoor open a fraction of an inch, enough to glimpse the room above. One guard stood near the front door, another by the fireplace. Hargrove sat with his back to the trapdoor while Lillian faced him across the table. Her eyes suddenly flicked downward, catching the slight movement of the trapdoor. A flicker of hope crossed her face before she carefully looked away, giving no indication of what she'd seen. Perhaps I need time to consider your offer, she said, her voice louder than necessary. After all, I've come a long way to simply give up my inheritance. I'm afraid time is a luxury you don't have, Miss Porter, Hargrove replied. My associates outside are growing impatient. Killian used their conversation as cover to fully open the trapdoor and silently emerge. The guard by the fireplace had his attention fixed on Lillian, while the other was peering through the front window. With calculated precision, Killian struck the nearest guard with the butt of his pistol, dropping him instantly. Before the other could react, Killian had his gun trained on Hargrove's back. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice cold as ice. Hargrove froze while the second guard reached for his weapon. Lillian, seeing her opportunity, grabbed the heavy ironstone mug from the table and smashed it against the side of Hargrove's head. He slumped forward, momentarily stunned. The remaining guard fired wildly, missing Killian but splintering the wood beside him. Killian returned fire with deadly accuracy and the man crumpled to the floor. "Are you hurt?" Killian asked, quickly moving to Lillian's side. "No," she was trembling slightly but remained composed. "There are more outside, at least 3. Killian extinguished the lamps, plunging the cabin into darkness. "Stay down. We're going to make for the horses out back." As they crept toward the rear door, shots shattered the front windows. Killian returned fire, providing cover as Lillian slipped outside. He followed, keeping his body between her and the cabin. They had nearly reached the trees when a rider emerged from the darkness, blocking their path. Killian fired, missing as the horse reared. The rider charged, and Killian tackled Lillian out of the way, feeling the burn of a bullet grazing his arm as they rolled into the underbrush. "Run," he urged, pushing her toward the dense forest as he fired again at their pursuer. They fled through the trees, the shouts of Hargrove's men fading behind them. Killian led them to a rocky outcropping overlooking a small ravine. "There's a cave," he whispered, guiding her down a treacherous path barely visible in the moonlight. The cave was shallow but well concealed by overhanging vegetation. They pressed deep into the shadows, Killian's arms protectively around Lillian as they listened to the sounds of their pursuers crashing through the forest above. "They'll search till dawn," Killian murmured. "We'll wait them out." Lillian nodded, her body shivering against his from cold, fear, or both. "You're bleeding," she whispered, her fingers finding the wet patch on his sleeve. "It's nothing. A graze." Despite his dismissal, she tore a strip from her petticoat and bound his arm with gentle efficiency. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "How did you know they'd taken me?" "I didn't," he admitted, "but Hargrove was asking about you in town. I knew something was wrong." She was silent for a moment. "You came back for me despite the danger. I couldn't leave you." The words felt raw, honest in a way Killian wasn't accustomed to. In the darkness, he felt her hand find his. "Everyone was right about you, Killian Drake. You do have ice in your veins." Her fingers squeezed his. "But I think there's fire beneath the ice." Something shifted in Killian, then a wall crumbling, a dam breaking. Years of carefully maintained emotional distance dissolved as he pulled Lillian closer, one hand cupping her face in the darkness. "No one's seen that in a very long time," he whispered. "I see it," she replied, and then her lips were on his, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Killian returned the kiss with unexpected fervor, all his suppressed emotions channeling into this one perfect connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "If we survive this," he said, his forehead resting against hers, "I want to know what this is between us." "We'll survive," she promised. "And then we'll have all the time we need to find out." They remained hidden through the night, listening as Hargrove's men searched the surrounding area. By dawn, the forest had fallen silent. Killian cautiously emerged to scout their position. "They've gone," he reported upon returning. "Probably regrouping in town." "What do we do now?" Lillian asked, accepting his hand as they climbed from their hiding place. "The marshal should receive our telegram today. We need to avoid Hargrove until help arrives." He considered their options. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles east. We can shelter there." They traveled cautiously, staying off the trails and using the terrain for concealment. By midday, they reached the abandoned cabin Killian had mentioned. It was little more than a one-room shack, but the roof was intact and it offered better protection than the forest. As Killian secured the perimeter, Lillian found an old kettle and set about making a fire in the small stone hearth. The domesticity of the scene struck Killian as he returned this capable woman creating comfort in the midst of danger. "We should be safe here," he said, placing his rifle within easy reach. "The marshal will bring deputies. Once they arrest Hargrove, you can claim what's rightfully yours." Lillian looked up from the fire. "And what about us, Killian?" He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "I've spent years feeling nothing, Lillian, letting nothing touch me." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Then you walked into my life and suddenly everything is different." "Different how?" Her voice was soft, encouraging. "I care what happens. To you, to us. It terrifies me and exhilarates me at the same time." He met her eyes, allowing her to see the emotions he'd kept hidden for so long. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in mine." Lillian's smile was radiant. "They said you had ice in your veins, Killian Drake, but I always suspected there was something more beneath the surface." She leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. "I want that future too." Their moment of connection was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching riders. Killian was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand as he peered through a crack in the shutters. "U.S. Marshals," he said with relief, recognizing the lead rider's distinctive hat. They made good time. The next hours passed in a flurry of activity. Marshal Harrington took their statements, dispatching deputies to secure the Porter mine and arrest Hargrove, who had fled back to town. "We've been building a case against Hargrove for months," the marshal explained. "Your evidence might be the final piece we needed." By nightfall, word came that Hargrove and his men had been apprehended attempting to flee the territory. The Porter mine was under federal protection, and Lillian's claim was secure. "It's over," Killian said as they stood on the porch of the marshal's office in Redemption Creek. "Your father's legacy is safe." Lillian leaned against him, exhaustion and relief evident in her posture. "I couldn't have done it without you. What will you do now?" He asked, trying to keep his tone neutral despite the growing fear that she would return to her life in Boston. She turned to face him, her green eyes serious in the lamplight. "I'm staying, Killian. This is my home now, the mine, Redemption Creek." Her hand found his. "You." The last of Killian's ice melted at her words. He pulled her into his arms, no longer concerned about the curious gazes of passers-by. "I've never had a home," he admitted. "Not a real one. Then we'll build one together." Her eyes shone with promise and possibility. 1 year later, the Porter Drake mine was the most productive in the territory, employing fair practices that had become the standard for the region. The modest house Killian had built for them overlooked the valley, close enough to town for convenience but far enough for peace. On a warm summer evening, they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. Killian's arm rested comfortably around Lillian's shoulders, his hand occasionally drifting to the gentle swell of her abdomen where their first child grew. "Any regrets?" Lillian asked, looking up at the man who had changed so much in the time she'd known him. His face, once an impassive mask, now easily showed the love and contentment he felt. Killian shook his head, drawing her closer. "Not one." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You melted every inch of ice in me, Lillian Drake. You gave me back my heart." "And you gave me mine," she replied, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. As the stars began to appear above them, Killian reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The man he had been cold, distant, untouchable seemed like a stranger now. In its place was a man who loved deeply, felt completely, and lived fully. All because one determined woman had seen beneath the ice to the fire that burned within.